I've said before that any Yu-Gi-Oh cards that appeared in the anime are primed to get a retrain someday, but to go even further, some still need to be made for the card game the first time around. Looking at all 6 anime series that cover the main card game, there are dozens of archetypes that were created for it that still don't exist in real life, but every year, a few previously anime-only cards pop up for both nostalgia and the sake of completion. Since we'll eventually have every anime card printed, it's a matter of time. So for this video, we want to go over the coolest anime-only archetypes that we want Konami to get to printing already. And depending how far in the future you're watching this video, maybe they already exist. Besides talking about how they were used in the anime, we'll talk about how they might play in real life, especially since Konami tends to redesign the effects and playstyle for some of the older anime cards. Also, they're still eligible for this list if they appeared in video games like Duel Links, since those games tend to put the cards in with no changes from the anime effects. And to help me dig through years of Yu-Gi-Oh content, joining me is Sam from Dungeon Dive Bar.
That's the sound of me drinking, because I think about how many cards haven't been made real yet, as I sip my soda.
Now, let's produce the top 10 Yu-Gi-Oh anime archetypes that don't exist yet. Number 10, Cook Pals. You can never go wrong with food monsters. They're always so fun, and we went over them before, prior to Hungry Burger getting its own archetype. So the food Yu-Gi-Oh landscape is ever-changing. This archetype was used by the chef in Arc 5, Yugioh, or Reed Pepper in the dub, considering Arc 5 is the anime that introduced pendulum monsters and created various archetypes that used the other 4 special summoning methods in the game at the time. It makes sense why Cook Pals were never chosen to be put in the real-life card game. They're all weak monsters with nothing in the extra deck. They basically swarm the field and have cards that destroy themselves for your ace trap called Food Cemetery, which stacks the destroyed Cook Pals under it. Then you have cards that summon their bosses, the Royal Cook Pals, which all have the same effect that let you destroy your opponent's monster when they summon them. So you get a bunch of them on the field, and you prevent your opponent from establishing board presence. Also, you have to bounce them back to your hand to activate these effects.
I just want to go over some of these names, because they're absolutely hysterical. Puma Potato. It's just a potato with an angry leopard face on it. Cluckwheat. It's a chicken with a wheat bag around it. Rabbit Tomato. It's an abomination. It should not be. It's also technically a tomato card, and I think that's hilarious.
The big issue with all these monsters is they have no ways to significantly damage your opponent. They're very weak, even with the attack doubling effects on their bosses. The main way they dealt damage was you swarm the field with the bosses, use each of their attack doubling effects on one monster so there's one giant Royal Cook Pal, and then attack. Plus they have traps that deal burn damage. However, one bit of disruption and this will probably fall apart. Luckily, they were in the anime where they don't have to worry about that as much. Maybe when they're printed, you could refine the effects to make it easy for them to get big attack, and make more of them that provide extension, and those new ones can be pendulum monsters to go with the Arc 5 theme. Also, I could see some of them being Xyz monsters, since they do have that unique mechanic of stacking cards under their trap, similar to how Xyz monsters work.
I think going the route of making them pendulum and having it be pendulum support, because they're all different levels and their effects actually really do well with blocking the drawback of Master Rule 5 Pendulum, because their effects, kind of like Melfi, they return themselves to the hand in order to activate their effects, so they won't necessarily end up in the extra deck, and that would allow you to use them to actually fight.
And for quick context, pendulum monsters go to the extra deck when they leave the field rather than the graveyard, so this allows you to recycle them like crazy if they bounce back to the hand. Really, I just want these guys for how they look, especially the bosses. The Royal Cook Pals are amazing. The Salisbury steak guy has eggs for eyes, the spaghetti guy has noodle hair, and how does the curry guy's curry never spill out of his body? As I said, amazing character design. Number 9, Mech Lord Cores. In the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds, the final villain team of the Grand Pre-Arc used Mech Lords, which were machines that worked against synchro-summoned monsters by doing things like negating them or stealing them. As we discussed in our terrible boss archetype list, they were not good, with their bosses only getting their effects when synchro monsters were on the field. field. But later mech lords at least had effects that steal or hinder your opponent's monsters regardless of what kind they were, and you just get bonuses if they happen to be synchros. However, one sub-archetype of the 3 mech lord emperors that was never brought to the real-life card game were the pieces that accompany the mech lords: the core, attack, carrier, guard, and top. Each emperor had the same set of 5 pieces, stylized and named after them. When a core is destroyed, it special summons its respective emperor and the other 4 pieces right from the deck. Then the pieces protect the mech lord emperor in some way, like negating a spell or stopping an attack. While I do expect them to print these pieces someday, I think giving those 5 pieces crazier effects would at least make the archetype more fun to play. Being able to summon 5 monsters off the core is pretty nuts, but mech lords are so bad, I'd say do it. It's the modern solution for old archetypes. Look at the Junk and Synchron support with Junk Speeder. It special summons 5 Synchron tuners from the deck when it's summoned, and it made the deck a lot more usable, but it's not broken, it's not even meta.
We don't have a card that functions like that. We don't have an archetype that's like each individual piece is its own separate monster, but it also functions like kind of like a union monster. I just think it would be neat. I like things that are neat. And also, then we could get a retrade of Mechlord Astromechanical, who had a really cool anime effect of quick effect, banish a Mechlord part, activate that effect as Mechanical's effect.
I also think the pieces need to make the original Mechlords better outside of just working with synchro monsters at spell speed 1. Maybe turn the Emperor effects into quick effects when one of the pieces is on the field, similar to how the Pearly Xyz monsters have their effects become quick effects when they have specific materials, and even have one of the pieces say the Emperor effects now work on all monsters, not just synchro. For naming the archetype so it can actually work like an archetype, they just need to add a word after Mechlord in their name and it counts as a new archetype, like how Mechlord Emperor and Mechlord Army are sub-archetypes of Mechlord in general. Like put a hyphen in their name and call them Mechlord Peace or Mechlord Assist.
Mechlord Part could easily be a third archetype, or like Mechlord Army, Wizel Top, Mechlord Army, Wizel Carrier. It could be very useful. There's plenty of options for it, and plus, they look cool.
It's also worth noting that Duel Links added in the pieces for Emperor Wizel only when his anime user Primo was added to the game. As expected, no one played them, but it shows it was on Konami's mind. As with any anime cards they add to Duel Links that were never printed, it's almost the anime effect verbatim, so it doesn't reflect what the card's actual effect would be if it comes out. See Centaur Mina or Ashka Pillar, meaning there's a glimmer of hope that Mechlords could get some crazy support. Number 8. Jean-Claude Magnum's Ninjas. This one I just want for the sake of completion. Of every card shown in the Duel Monsters anime, if you look at the earliest archetype introduced that still hasn't been printed from the beginning up until the Magnum duel, it's these ninjas. Though some cards were created with different effects than they had in the anime, and the only exception I could find was Johnny Stepp's Heavy Metal Musician King, so why don't they just tack that one on to that Metamorph archetype they created with Zoa and the other monsters from the Bandikeith Joey duel. But the point is, Jean-Claude's ninjas are the oldest unprinted archetype. I was always intrigued by this duel. It was definitely a throwaway, but one of my early decks was Playground Warrior Toolbox that used Command Knight, the common ninjas, and Amazonas Paladin, so Magnum using ninjas versus Mai's Amazonas Swordswoman was in line with my interests, even though Magnum was clearly created to be defeated within 10 minutes. That being said, ninjas are already a well-supported archetype, so what's the point of adapting these ninjas into the card game? Well, as I said, completion, but also I just thought they were a cool introduction to ninjas as an archetype that Strike Ninja teased us with. For years I was looking for these guys in packs, like I thought, oh, there's those other ninjas, so these guys must be printed, they were in the anime, right? Their main effects were nothing special, just summon one ninja, then summon more from your hand or deck, then if you have specific ninjas, you can summon their Ninja Shogun. This is sort of like the speed of how modern archetypes summon, so maybe you can just print them without alterations. Just make sure you don't accidentally break the existing ninja archetype. Maybe have a clause in there that they can't be used for a fusion summon to really make sure they don't interfere. And to differentiate them from the other ninjas, perhaps do what the Infernoble Knights did with the Noble Knights and add another word or prefix to their name, like Classic Ninja or Ninja Master, so that they're a subtype of ninja that counts in both the existing and new archetype. Or if they really want to keep them separate, they can just call them a name that makes them incompatible with the ninja archetype. Call them Nanjas. Yes, that's a Speed Racer movie reference. I guess the main issue with them is spamming a bunch of bodies on the board now makes them easy material for generic Link monsters, like Appaloosa or SB Little Knight, so maybe we gotta slap a few more restrictions on them that make them only usable with ninjas or warrior monsters, or they can't be used for extra deck stuff. Finally, I like his Kite Equip spell. It just gave his ninjas the ability to attack directly, which is useless now, so because he used it to sneak a paid actor on the field to steal Mai since he's a creep, it could instead have an effect that takes one of your opponent's monsters to reference that scene. Really, I just want it back because it looks cool.
So I also really find this pretty fun because, one, no matter what, every time I watch Battle City, I never saw this episode. I only learn about this duel through the flashbacks Mai has. But also, I was looking up the cards, and I noticed something interesting about Great Kite of Ninja. It can only be equipped to a Ninja Master card, of which there is one. So it could just be Ninja Master, which would also fit with being, a movie star. They're all Master Ninjas. But also what you're saying with one of them being a one-off fringe card, I invite you to look at Ninja Commando Kabuki's text. When this card is summoned, special summon one ninja from your hand or deck. That's instant Grandmaster Hanzo. Immediately special summon him, search out any ninja card. It's actually incredible synergy off the special summon.
Though he only summons normal ninja monsters with these effects, so do you think they'd restrict it that way?
Ninja normal monsters is such a weird thing that I think we could see some very funky Xyz archetypes or such for it. Except the normal monsters don't have matching levels. I'm sorry, Kunoichi Ayame, the ninja girl. Also very funny is she was made a ninja only in the dub. She was just Kunoichi Soldier Ayame in the Japanese version. So she's not actually part of the ninja archetype at all, canonically.
I guess that makes her the spy gal Misty of the group.
Or worse, Frog the Jam.
Number 7, Stray Cat. Kathy was probably my most underrated character from Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. The few times that she dueled, she seemed very dominant until the plot wanted her to lose. And in one of those losses, she just felt bad for the kid that she was dueling and threw the duel. She had such minimal duel time, anytime she got one, I was interested, even if it was when she was possessed by the villain. And she felt like the one from Yuma's friend group who could throw hands if needed. It was mostly the personality, but it made me slightly more interested enough in her deck too. She uses Stray Cat, Cat Girl, and Stray Cat Girl. You got that all sorted out?
Kathy actually plays 3 separate archetypes. She plays Cat, Neko, and Cat Girl. But there's only one Neko card in her deck, which is Neko Gal number 2. And she has one Cat Girl card, but she plays cards that support cards that just don't exist, or the dub itself did make all of them cats. Having a separate Cat versus Neko archetype was something only the original Japanese kept.
That being said, it's mainly a slow Xyz deck. You summon a Stray Cat, then you can summon another one from your hand only, and if one of them is targeted for an attack, you have 2 pathways. You can either tribute it to special summon Stray Cat Girl from your hand, indestructible by battle and attack mode, or let it be destroyed and you can special summon Monster Cat from the deck, which board wipes all level 4 or lower monsters your opponent controls and lets you recover cats from the graveyard. Add in Cat Girl, who has the effect that negates a battle position change by your opponent, which is a unique effect. Not very useful, but it's funny.
And then the dog archetype did the exact same thing, but dog themed. But we did get to see a talking dog, and honestly, that was worth it.
She also has Xyz monsters that match the cat's level, but their only effects are direct attacking and mild attack boosting.
They have this really cool flood mechanic of swarming the field for Xyz, and beast monsters are an incredibly good archetype, except her bosses, because it's Yu-Gi-Oh, are Beast Warriors and then Spellcasters, because it's Cattail Magician and basically Catwoman, who can gain 800 attack by detaching a material. I see you over there, knockoff Leviathan Dragon.
Since they put this archetype in Duel Links, I was able to try it out with the anime effects, and I learned it mainly has no game plan. The searching spells are nice since they're pretty modern, letting you add cat cards from your deck to hand, but you'd have to give these monsters better field swarming effects, like not just just limiting the extra summons to being monsters in the hand, and having Monster Cat just board wipe all of your opponent's field, regardless of their monster's levels, and have it come out as a quick effect rather than from another monster being destroyed by battle. In a way, I'm just thinking to turn Monster Cat into Bear Grum, banish a few cats to summon it, it's a big old dude for the field, it can Raigeki your opponent, and it can resummon itself from the graveyard by banishing more cats. Maybe they can also add in a new Xyz monster with some crazy negates, and have it kinda look like Kathy, similar to the other monster cards based on Zexal characters. Overall, it's not the most flashy archetype and probably could have just been released as pack filler in 2014, but since it wasn't, Konami has a chance to make it slightly more usable than it would have been. Number 6. Doll Chimera. It seems that Yu-Gi-Oh! GX had the largest amount of archetypes made specifically for the anime. Main characters and main villains tended to have new archetypes that were actively being printed, but if you weren't in the main cast, your deck was either an archetype or gimmick that existed for years already, like Giant Orc Union, Spirit of the Pharaoh, Vampires, or Gradius, or they just made them an archetype with very specific cards that only work because the duel is scripted for them to always have the cards they needed in their hand. Almost all these duels were with one-episode filler characters, which there were a lot of, but one of the coolest characters was Alice, a doll who came to life and duels students into submission where they fall under her spell to serve her. Alice's deck revolves around summoning the Doll Chimera, which needs different doll part cards on the field, and a special spell to send the parts to the graveyard to get out the Chimera. Doll Chimera is just a giant beat stick that can revive itself by sending more doll parts to the graveyard. But that's not her only gimmick. She also has a monster named Sheila who gets 1,000 attack points per set of 4 doll parts in the graveyard, and Alice the Wandering Doll, who switches control when she's targeted for an attack, which works with Alice's field spell Cursed Dollhouse, which summons doll parts from the deck when Alice changes control. Like, you can see the wheels start to turn on the strategy for how this archetype can swarm the field a bit. The deck has a few other searching and reviving cards, but that was the main strategy.
The doll parts are all normal monsters. Do you know what that means?
Rescue Rabbit!
Yes, Rescue Rabbit, but that also means they're supported by Princess Cologne, Box of Friends, and Grandpa Demetto, which support level 4 doll monster cards. Doll monster being its own separate archetype. So there are specific cards that could be dolls. You could just have a whole doll archetype and combine the two and just make it around swarming with normal monsters to drop a boss. And since Grandpa Demetto's effect is detach a material from Princess Cologne, special summon 2 normal monsters with 0 attack or defense, and they become level 8 dark monsters for number 22 Franken. Think about how much normal support there is. Unexpected Die, Painful Decision, Silent Doom. There's so many normal monster support cards. White Elephant's Gift could even be used because they're normal monsters with less than 500 attack. You could do a lot.
To be fair, that was already Alice's plan in the anime. She had cards that specialize in normal monster support, like Soul Resurrection or Dark Factory of Mass Production to recover normal monsters from the graveyard, but I feel you would need to give the parts effects that let you search other doll parts or special summon themselves if doll parts are on the field. Next, the Doll Chimera needs more of a payoff. Having big attack is nice, but I think it should become a contact fusion, like how the Gate Guardian retrains have 4 different fusions depending on the parts that you use, and each fusion has a different type of card it can negate or protect against. Like maybe there's a doll creature that just uses the head and arms and it's an Omni negate. Then it can tag out into a different Doll Chimera fusion for protection on your opponent's turn. Then when it's your turn, you can bring out the big Chimera to just overwhelm your opponent with attack points.
I think it's also a good opportunity to make Doll of Demise real.
Finally, you would need to speed up the field spell and Wandering Doll. Like, the field spell should search a doll or doll part right away, and Alice should be able to swap control right away, or at least with a faster condition than the battle phase, like how Ibli can summon herself on the opponent's side of the field as soon as she's sent to the graveyard. Besides triggering your searches that way, putting an unwanted monster on your opponent's field is great for the modern game, since it blocks your opponent from using traps like Infinite Impermanence or Evenly Matched, which need a clear field to be used from their hand. With a bit more speed and disruption on getting the doll stuff out, I could see this being a fun rogue deck. Number 5. Dark Mummy. With Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns being the most recent series to cover the main card game, its archetypes tend to be the most battle-ready out of the gate since the anime took actual meta strategies into consideration. But with it also being the most recent series to cover the main game, it has the most missing archetypes in real life. An archetype that feels low on Konami's priority list is the Dark Mummy archetype. These were mummies combined with surgical tools that worked with virus traps, which are traps that tribute dark monsters of certain stats to destroy specific kinds of cards in your opponent's hand and field for a few turns. However, all the viruses the user had were anime only as well. These viruses were pretty effective, negating and lowering monsters' attack for a few turns, but the mummies and viruses were basically separate in terms of strategy, outside of the Link mummy having a burn effect when you draw a trap, and the mummies having the right stats to activate the viruses, so maybe you could combine them a bit more when printing them. There were only 3 mummies in the deck shown in the anime, so there's room to create a few new ones that can maybe search out the viruses or have effects built in that work like the viruses. Since the existing virus traps can be very unfair when they're searchable, maybe these new viruses can be a sub-archetype of the regular viruses based on the ones used in the anime, which were computer virus themed rather than biological based. If you've ever seen a Labyrinth card search out Eradicator Epidemic Virus turn 1 and tribute their lady to destroy your Ritual or Dinomorphia deck immediately on your turn, you know the pain they can cause when left unchecked. The point is, make the virus cards part of the main plan for the Dark Mummies, but make sure they're fair. Otherwise, this deck is pretty underdeveloped, mainly because of their user. She went by Byra in the anime, and she was part of the antagonist group from Season 1, the Knights of Hanoi. She was at the level of henchman where she was notable enough to get a name, duel, and screen time afterwards, but not notable enough to get a win, so her deck played like a generic Link deck that swarmed a bit with a big boss that wasn't too big, similar to the other 2 henchmen at her level. They got the same treatment, where they had an underdeveloped new archetype that played like a generic Link deck that hasn't made it to the main card game yet.
I'm gonna kind of go a little off script and just cover all 3 of the Knights of Hanoi lieutenants that we didn't get printed yet, but there's virus archetype, which you're talking about with the surgical forceps and being medical themed because she's a medical doctor. Everyone in Reigns was competent. She played a trap focused deck and ran Temple of the Kings so she could activate it turn 1. You don't see that kind of thing in most of the animes. Certainly not a card Odeon played. And you know what else is in her deck that is 100% why I like her, and I'm sure you'll love her even more. You want to know what cards she played? Ikebio Drakmord. It was this banished via Trickstar Reincarnation. And Giant Germ. She ran Giant Germ too because it's a virus. And then we've got Faust, who has worms, motor worms. It's engines and worms combined, and it's about token spam, kind of like a faster insect queen, which I think could also be really useful because tokens are so powerful and popular with Link monsters. And then there's the last guy who dueled Gore, who uses Helix with 2 X's because he's edgy. It's just a stall deck. Stall decks can go away. I do like that one of his cards is named Marmatroll though. Just picturing Marmaduke punching a guy.
Yeah, I just chose Dark Mummy because I liked them aesthetically more than the other henchmen, but you could also just release them as a big old pile of new Cyberse monsters to tackle all the knights that are in that limbo of notability. Number 4, Hydra Drive, another Vrains archetype. Remember when I said they have a lot of missing archetypes in the real life game? Well, one of the main bosses of Season 2 hasn't had any of his new cards touch the real life game yet. Bowman used it, who was basically the sub-boss of Season 2 and had a lot of duels to develop his deck. He had about 20 Hydra Drive cards by the end of it. Their power is in their Link monsters, which get special effects when your opponent has monsters of a certain attribute on the field, but only the 4 elemental ones usually. Light and dark are generally safe.
He had 6 duels and an archetype that is incredibly flushed out and supported in such an incredible way that there's no real archetype like it that's been printed. Especially with the fact that it has a spell card in it that's unrelated to the archetype, but Judgment Arrows, which is a Link spell, which has arrows pointing up, giving you 5 extra monster zones you can summon Link monsters or Pendulum to, which if that card can never be printed, and it's just, I don't know how else to describe it other than Hydra Drive was a very well thought out deck that focused on stun and attribute manipulation, which is incredibly rare, and then he just keeps evolving as per his characterization in the anime with getting new links and new concepts.
The smaller links just get to attack directly when monsters of certain attributes are on the field, while the bigger ones can change their attribute to match their opponent's monsters and can even be multiple attributes at the same time. Usually those ones act as floodgates, where any monsters that match their attribute have their effects negated, and then they have battle phase effects, like getting a second attack after battling a monster that matches one of their attributes, or making your opponent send monsters to the graveyard after battle. They even had a few dice roll mechanics, like the Hydrodrive Monarch or Atlas, where each side of the die acts as one of the 6 attributes in the game for a bit of luck. I like how you can do it a few times in a turn, so there's a calculated risk if you need to wipe out a few attributes at once. The fact that you can customize your attributes on these monsters really makes this an interesting archetype. It can create a lot of back and forth against multi-attribute decks.
In a format dominated by a single attribute, that card could be killer. Imagine you go up to a tournament and you have a monster that's specific effect is, I am unaffected by fire monster effects and cannot be targeted for attacks by fire monsters. And that's just insane to me that there's a card that could go, I shut down an entire deck.
As mentioned, the lack of light and dark options give this deck a major hole, with the only advantages against light and dark being if one of the die roll effects lands on light and dark. Ultimately, these monsters can create some busted game states if left unchecked, so I can see why Konami has been a bit timid in releasing them. So while we wait for them to enter the game, at least go watch the tense duels they helped create in the anime. Number 3, Maiden in Love. This one was used by Blair in GX, so I thought conceptually was an interesting character. Not so much from her initial appearance, but I liked it when she joined the crew in seasons 3 and 4 because she had no idea that reality-shattering events regularly took place, and she was not initiated like everyone else, so she had the very real person reactions of, the hell's going on when things started happening.
It's that gif of Donald Glover walking in with pizzas and the apartment's on fire. Like, she has no idea about the magical stuff. She just showed up to go to same school as her crush, like an act, like, you know, one of those romance mangas would have. And then all of a sudden, he's target of a cult and another dimension's trying to break him mentally so that he can become a king and a god. And also Yubel's there.
They didn't utilize her much, but I liked it when she got to participate, though her initial appearance was before anything crazy happened, but it did have her most memorable deck, the Maiden in Love. Maiden in Love is a monster that puts maiden counters on your opponent's monsters if they attack her. She can't be destroyed by battle when she's in attack position, so she can potentially stick on the field to keep on distributing counters. Then Blair uses her special equip spells that affect monsters with maiden counters. Cupid Kiss lets you take control of your opponent's monster with a maiden counter on it, and Happy Marriage lets maiden gain attack equal to the monster stolen. The issues with this are pretty obvious. This was another archetype they put in Duel Links based on the few cards we saw in the anime, so actually being able to play her really emphasizes her problems for me. It needs way more than the anime effects verbatim. Only having battle destruction protection means the tiniest Regeki gets rid of her, and only being able to give counters via being attacked means your opponent can just not attack her. In the anime, she did have a trap called Defense Maiden, which redirects all attacks to the Maiden in Love, but that really only works in the anime where there are limited resources. Also, making her other cards equip spells is cruel, since equip spells are most prone to removal since they just sit on the field. You either have to give them protection that prevents them from being destroyed or targeted, or just make them another type of spell. And for Cupid's Kiss, it doesn't just cleanly take the opponent's monster if it has a maiden counter on it. You have to equip it to the monster, then when you take damage from that monster, now you can steal it. I don't know why they gave it extra steps. An easy upgrade would be to let the maiden give counters faster, maybe make it like aliens that give their counters when they're summoned or when effects are activated, or it's just an effect that she can activate freely to distribute counters. And make the counters do something. Monsters lose attack, she gains attack, anything. And since you only need one counter to activate the equip spells, make stacking the counters worth something, like after 3 the monster can't activate their effect. I also feel like she would need a field spell that uses the counters, like it lets you remove counters anywhere on the field for extra summons or searches or negates, like the Kaiju field spell. Make it a wedding chapel. And I didn't even mention it yet, but this was one of the funniest duels in the anime, with monsters falling in love and beefing with other monsters in love, and you can see the outline of Sparkman's face, so I think you could make some amusing card art referencing the episode for any new cards you make for the archetype.
It was honestly one of the goofiest duels of season 1. This girl broke into a volcanic island in the middle of nowhere in order to break into the most security-heavy dorm on the island. She wanted to steal Zane's deck because she was madly in love with him, and then Jaden beat her in a duel, and she went, I'm in love with Jaden now. And then that's why she came back, so she could be in the same dorm as Jaden.
It's just a shame she never took time to expand her Maiden in Love deck to be better during her time skip.
And it's nothing to do with Maiden in Love personally. I think it's a very funny card of battle, take control. And we have that now in Nightmare Magician and the illusion monsters of anytime they battle, neither player can be destroyed by battle. You could make Blair an illusion monster deck based off of her cards. They did it with Gazelle and Chimera in Baphomet. Make Blair have illusion cards that can't be destroyed by battle and then take control on the end phase or the end of the damage step. And then her eggs are also really weird because they never did anything. They were just eggs that could be used to summon cards that don't exist. The cards were referenced on the card text and then were never played because Blair had 3 on-screen duels to her name and she used a different deck in each of them.
Yeah, honestly, I would just combine the other cards Blair played with this archetype and give them effects that work with the Maiden or the counters. Those cards had nothing to them, and this gives them a better theme than just baby dragon that turns into a bigger dragon. So go forth, Maiden, find your prince and a way to expedite putting counters on your opponents.
That's game! Thanks for getting your game on, sweetie!
Number 2, Alchemy Beasts. I'm kinda surprised that the final opponent of the villain team of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Season 1 Amniel never got his main archetype adapted. The rest of the Shadow Riders played existing archetypes, as was common for GX Season 1, but for who was essentially the sub-boss of the season, I would have expected this to at least be pack filler back in the day, though I understand why to an extent. The Alchemy Beast playstyle is pretty underbaked. They're all animals combined with metal who just get summoned right from the deck when you have a specific spell for each of them, and they all have 500 attack and defense and can attack directly. That's it. We mainly like them because of how they look, and with the knowledge of current Yu-Gi-Oh, they can give them more effects.
Their names are cool. They gave them the Blackwing treatment of an archetype name and then the card's name. Alchemy Beast Arados the Tin. Alchemy Beast Leon the Lead. Alchemy Beast Moonface the Silver. It's prime material, and then they just didn't use it.
However, the most interesting thing about them was to use their summoning spells. You had to have the continuous spell Chaos Distill on the field, which also hasn't been printed, and it just banishes any of your cards that would go to the graveyard, not your opponent's though. So it's a different version of Dimensional Fissure, which affects monsters on both sides of the field, and a weaker version of Macrocosmos, which is a card Amniel also used. Distill banishing everything for you could make it an instant staple of banish-heavy decks, so I don't know if Konami would want to print it without restrictions or just unleash it, but they put it in Duel Links as is, and it didn't seem to break anything. I could also see them giving Distill an additional Alchemy Beast effect, where maybe it searches one of their field spells once per turn. I'd also suggest giving the Alchemy Beasts more of a purpose than attacking directly, like turning the summoning spells into fusion spells and giving them fusion monsters. Otherwise, this will just be a banishing turbo archetype for Gren Maju, or even for potential retrains of Amniel's unrelated boss monsters that were actually printed and also get boosts from banished cards. Also to note, Speed Duels did give Amniel a skill where he can summon Alchemy Beasts as tokens, but we learned about that after we recorded this, so we're gonna pretend that doesn't exist.
First off, I also know if Banner were a duelist nowadays, he would 100% main Bystials, because his deck had no light or dark manipulation. He had all 4 other elements because, you know, alchemy.
Like, even without the modern game, I feel a banish-heavy deck like this still could have existed back in the day.
It's fascinating because it's not like banish decks weren't already a thing back in 2004, 2005. There wasn't a lot of consistency to them, but we had Dimensional Fissure, we had DD Scout playing, we had all of these different dimension cards, and there was no unifying theme to them. And we have cards related to alchemy, and a very few of Banner's cards were made real. We did get Golden Homunculus, we did get the Helios series. I'm sorry, I take that back. He would play Kashtira.
With their effects being very bland in the anime, they're pretty much a blank slate on how they can be revised, and with banish-heavy archetypes being all the rage now, such as Kashtira or Fluandereeze, their potential playstyle is welcome in the modern game. Honorable mentions usually goes here, but when recording, we ended up thinking of about 20 archetypes by the end, so why don't we just do a volume 2 of this topic someday if people are interested. GX alone decided to create like 10 archetypes on a rainy day whenever they felt like it. Oh, and a follow-up on the Jean-Claude Magnum segment, I remembered an older card that appeared in the anime that hasn't been printed yet. Mako's Great White Terror. Only the similarly named Great White exists, which I thought was just the same monster, so there you go. For number 1, this seemed like the most obvious choice. Anyone who watched the original anime had this on their list for years as cards they wanted to see made. Number 1, Valen's Armor. The Waking the Dragons arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was polarizing, I think. For me, it was my least favorite arc based on story, but I liked a lot of the duels. Though, for the longest time, a lot of the main cards were missing from this arc in the real-life game, in part to it being filler and Konami's main bits of nostalgia usually being tied to cards that were in the manga plotline for the original series. So things like Raphael's Guardians, Darts' Final Boss, or the Three Dragons took a while to come out, but at least some of those cards came out around the time of the anime, and eventually the rest of the cards came out anywhere from the late 2000s to 2023, except a lot of the Darts cards, don't know what's up with that. But one deck to have none of its cards printed was from a lead Orichalcos member, Valen. He played the Armor archetype, which were a bunch of pieces for a suit of cyberized armor that the user would eventually wear to take matters into their own hands and because it's cool as hell to watch. Basically, you summon one piece of armor, then you can summon more pieces of armor. Some of it's indestructible by battle or protects the other armor, so can sit on the field as you build your suit, and eventually you get the armor that boosts attack and lets you attack directly, so you can finish your opponent off with a single hit. And that's how I see them playing in real life, like a classic one-turn kill deck, where you play a bunch of board breakers or full field negates, find a way to special summon all your pieces, and then get a monster with a big attack number out there for a single blow. They could also go the other way and make the protection from the armor stronger so it could survive a turn and leave your opponent with no options on their turn, but I'm more of a fan of the classic OTK idea. And for the boss monster, I don't know, maybe a contact fusion with all the armor that summons a whole suit and it has like an outline of Valen or Joey on it.
MrTopTenList, you're missing the most obvious play on how to make these work. It is perhaps one of your most favorite card subtypes, Union Monsters.
No, I just got out of playing ABC Dragon Buster a year ago, don't pull me back in.
Oh, what? Another Machine Union archetype? Another DM-era Machine Union archetype? What a novel concept! Surely there isn't at least one of those that then got retrained, that then got retrained again, then they got added more support.
Yeah, they do have that Union Monsters self-equipping feel to them.
Especially because a lot of the cards that he used, very few spells. Valen used very few spells, and even fewer spells that were actually related to the archetype. Only one of them had armor in the name. And it's pull 4 armor monsters out of your deck and then send them to the grave after that turn ends. That is insane search and draw power. They have to have a restriction on extra deck summoning if you do that. Imagine summoning 4 level 4 or lower monsters from your deck at no cost.
That'd be like playing Junk Speeder.
Now, there's definitely a lot of work that has to go into them, and that's certainly why they never were made. But you know what? It could be worse. It could be like Guardians.
Oh god, needing equip spells to be summoned.
And has no searchability. What is it? King Dog something? Well, now I'm upset and have to look it up. Principug. Summon a guardian monster that can't be normal summoned or set.
Does it count as a guardian at least?
No, it's just a pug.
I understand why Konami might have waited on this archetype since it could have been too complicated for the older game, but with the speed of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, I could see it existing in some way. So with the armor being the biggest archetype from the original anime missing in the real-life card game, it was perfect for the number 1 on this list. Now, what did you think? Were all these archetypes ready for showtime, or are some of them beyond repair from their anime counterparts? And what are some of your favorite archetypes that were never printed, whether we discussed them or not? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.